There have been many scandalous stories and celebrations of the royal families in the Middle East in recent years, but this amazing story has undeservedly gone unnoticed. Not long ago, Sheikh Rashid Al Maktoum, the nephew of Dubai's ruler, contracted the deadly leukemia, a blood cancer. Doctors said the man wouldn't live more than 3 months. However, his wife, Englishwoman Natalie Lankester, worked a miracle. Rashid was suddenly cured, but another terrible ordeal lay ahead of him. What happened to him? How did his wife manage to save him? And how do they live now? Today, we will tell about this incredible and touching story. Subscribe to our channel, give us your likes. Let's get started. Rashid and his future wife Natalie met in Dubai, where the Englishwoman ran a chain of pet stores. Their love of horses brought them together. Their first meeting took place at the Dubai Equestrian Club. Natalie practiced dressage here, and her future husband was preparing for competitions. For Rashid Al Maktoum showed jumping is practically a profession. In 2010, the Sheikh became Asian vice champion in equestrian sports at the Continental Games in Guangzhou. The young people first met in 2015 and got married a few months later. At the time of the wedding, the bride was 26 years old and the groom was a year younger. Sheikh Rashid is heir to the multi-billion-dollar fortune of his father Ahmed Al Maktoum, who is the brother of Dubai's ruler Sheikh Mohammed. He owns many major real estate development, banking and investment companies in the Arab Emirates. However, Natalie attracted in the groom is not at all wealth or aristocratic status. This was clearly proved by the truly dramatic events that awaited the couple in the coming years after the wedding. But at first there was no sign of trouble. The newlyweds lived a happy married life. A year after their marriage, they had a baby girl who was named Hessa in honor of Rashid's mother. 3 years later, Rashid and Natalie had a second daughter, Aliyah. A few months after her birth, doctors gave Rashid a fatal diagnosis, leukemia. As tests showed, 86% of his blood was infected with cancer. People with this diagnosis usually live no more than 3 months. According to the recollections of his friends, Sheikh Rashid decided at once that it was the end. He began to prepare for death and fell into a kind of prostration. The man intended to live out his term quietly in Dubai, surrounded by his family. Perhaps it would have turned out that way if it hadn't been for one but. And that but was Natalie Al Maktoum, maiden name Lankester. She tried to make a simple point to her spouse. Yes, a terrible diagnosis had turned their family world upside down, but that was no reason to just lie down and die. Natalie convinced her husband that life was worth fighting for, but he refused to spend his last days on treatment that was unlikely to help. Rashid wanted to spend the rest of his life in his home next to his beloved wife and children and still enjoy his passion, horse riding. But in the end, Rashid accepted that he had to fight for life for the sake of his family. His uncle, the ruler of Dubai, Sheikh Mohammed, supported and helped his nephew in every way possible. In November 2019, Rashid Al Maktoum traveled to London for treatment at a top British hospital. The disease turned out to be severely neglected. For a long time before the diagnosis, Rashid felt sick. However, he thought it was fatigue and tried to ignore it. As a result, doctors had to literally pull him out of the embrace of death. Sheikh underwent an intensive and long course of chemotherapy. The man lost 30 kilograms and looked like a skeleton, but the worst part was different. The leukemia medications that Rashid was taking in large doses had serious side effects. In particular, they caused severe depression, which made the Sheikh not want to live. He locked himself in his room and slept 23 hours a day. For a month and a half, one of the richest men in the Arab Emirates was in this state. In those days, I lost my hair, my eyebrows, my beard, everything. I lost my identity, Rashid Al Maktoum later recalled. But somewhere in the back of his mind, he always had the thought that all his suffering had a deep meaning. He fights not only for his own life, but also for the happiness of his loved ones. After 40 days of shock chemotherapy, the leukemia suddenly receded. Even the doctors were surprised. In their experience, the disease at this stage can only be treated palliatively. It is reduced to alleviating the patient's suffering, but no more. The exception is very rare cases when the patient wants to live so much that in a way incomprehensible to science mobilizes its hidden resources. This is probably what Rashid Al Maktoum was able to do. After all, he knew that his beloved wife and 2 daughters were waiting for him outside the clinic. In the end, the desire to love and be loved was stronger than incurable leukemia. But Rashid's troubles didn't end there. The cancer medicines had such a serious effect that his depression became permanent. It lasted for a long 2 years. I went under, and for almost 2 years I wanted nothing to do. It felt like I was dead tired, but in fact I was depressed, recalls Sheikh. And this is where his wife Natalie helped him again. Thinking of various reasons, she constantly took her husband to the Dubai Equestrian Club. The woman was well aware of the beneficial effect horses have on the psyche. Given Rashid's long-standing passion for equestrian sports, Natalie's cunning worked. That was the second miracle. First, her husband was cured of the most dangerous cancer, and 2 years later he was fully recovered as a person. Today, Rashid marvels at how strong his wife was. During the most difficult period of their lives, she not only carried the whole house and the small children, but also managed to pull her husband out of his illness. Now he only occasionally visits a psychiatrist, as there is almost nothing left of the depression. Rashid just doesn't have time for bad thoughts, because he is actively preparing for the Summer Olympics, which will be held in 2024 in Paris. The man is confident that he will be able to join the Arab Emirates show jumping team. His dream is to compete at the Olympic Games with his wife. Natalie is also seriously engaged in show jumping, and she has a good chance to keep her husband company on his trip to Paris. Even if this doesn't happen, according to Rashid, he won't be less happy. Paradoxically, leukemia has taught him a lot. In fact, it has made him a different person. Today, Rashid is convinced that before this story, he looked too much into the future and often postponed events for later. In reality, you should live in the moment. You should be happy with the life you have now, the man who overcame the disease sincerely believes. Perhaps this recipe for happiness will seem too simple to some. However, it is worth considering that it is given by a billionaire who had everything: huge money, family happiness, power, and high position in society. Despite all this wealth, he was ready to give up the fight and die, but true love saved him. What do you think about this story? Subscribe to the channel, put a like, and see you soon.